Yesterday, I interviewed the Kavanaugh sisters for the second time, Paula, Joyce, and June, and what an amazing and inspiring trio of sisters. They wrote a book documenting their sexual abuse by their father over the course of many years. And I was just so blown away again by the directness of them, their openness, their compassion, their honesty about the ups and downs of their healing journey, which, as they say, continues years and years and years, has been going on for many years. And I think it was hearing them talk about how they're now helping volunteers who are working with an organization that works with perpetrators of sexual violence, to help these volunteers hold these perpetrators accountable. They work in groups, and Kavanaugh Sisters provide initial counseling to these volunteers who come from all walks of life, all socioeconomic backgrounds and ethnicities and so forth. But to hear them talk about how important it is to stop this cycle of abuse, not just after it's occurred in the healing part, but to begin to help perpetrators. And for some of us, that's hard to hear, but to hear the Kavanaugh sisters and hear their compassion and how they got there was so inspiring to me. And it made me think about what I'm doing as all these interviews I do. But this is one really that just made me think about, my own level of compassion and where I'm at. When I first started this podcast, it was all about, I'd gotten out of graduate school. I was working in Northern California. I was working in a clinic, and we were assessing and treating young kids who were showing early signs of psychosis. I loved that job. Phenomenal. Learned so much. And when I got out of school, got my degree, and I felt like I should be a psychologist, and whatever that was in my mind. I mean, I had some idea of, professional and knowledgeable, and I treated my interactions clinically as such. I thought that I should have answers, and if I didn't have the answers, I'd go get the answers. And I spent a lot of time, even in graduate school, just taking in all this information, right? Who do I need to read? What do I need to read? Who do I need to talk to? What workshop? On and on and on. Because I thought that was going to make me the best trauma therapist I could become. I knew I wanted to get into trauma. Now, let me just pause here and say that in part, I was driven by that thirst/need for knowledge, because when I was younger, and only now am I able to look at this, right? When I was younger, I felt that I wasn't really smart enough, and that really impacted me. I compound that with, the bullying I had experienced when I was younger, just really negatively impacted my self-esteem. So here I was, now making the choice to go to graduate school, getting my degree, coming out, feeling like I, needed to have the answers when I was working with these kids. And a large part of what we were doing was offering these assessments, literally 40-page assessment where you're working with a colleague and you're sitting in a room talking to this young kid, maybe 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, and you're asking them these questions and trying to find out about different groups of symptoms. Are they hearing things, hearing noises, hearing whispers? Do they think they're seeing shadows, and on and on and on and on and on. And it was really interesting for me because I loved finding out, just getting to the point where I could discover, uncover, explore, and develop a relationship, surely, with these young kids, but find out what was going on. I wanted to help. Of course I did. We all do, right? And I had been working there for a couple of years, and I started getting the idea that I wanted to start my own business. I was doing a lot of commuting back and forth, listening to a lot of podcasts about entrepreneurs doing incredible things with their lives and creating the lives they wanted to have. And that's what I wanted to do. I'd never started a podcast before, never interviewed anyone before, but I wanted to create my own business and have a podcast, all of which to help young slash new trauma therapists like myself learn more about trauma, be more inspired, decrease their trepidation about working with people who've been impacted by trauma. Because sure enough, there are a lot of young therapists out there, and there were in my practica and internships who wanted to help, but oftentimes when someone who is severely traumatized would come in, a lot of interns just don't have the experience, and they're kind of overwhelmed. But this is what I wanted to do. So while I was still working at this job, I had an experience that shifted my professional life, my life dramatically. What happened was this. Let me just hang on here. Let me fix my microphone. I was working with this young kid. I was working with a colleague of mine, and we were in the process of doing this assessment, and we were getting nowhere. Asking questions, it just was getting nowhere, and it was very frustrating, very frustrating. And I finally, at one point, just threw the assessment down, put the assessment down on the table, and just said, "Look," to this young kid, what is it that your parents in the waiting room are not seeing, your teachers are not hearing, the other therapists that you've seen before you got here, what are they all not hearing that they need to hear from you? And in that act, right, in throwing down of that assessment, right, discarding all formality, shifting gears, and just trying to connect with this kid as a human, right, as a human friggin' being, I shifted the whole tenor, mood in the room, and it opened the doors for communication and understanding and knowledge about what this young kid was experiencing, right? Shifted the whole assessment, basically. And that so opened my eyes and empowered me really for the first time. Look, when I was in graduate school, I knew about the importance of, genuineness and authenticity and all that stuff. But the problem was I had gone back to school as an older student. I think it was like 36, right? And I had been into therapy and blah, blah, blah. Travel. I thought I had that dialed in. And the fact of the matter was, I didn't realize how vital that was within the context of doing therapy and specifically working with people who'd been impacted by trauma. So that experience, excuse me, really helped me see that one, yes, the assessment was important and knowledge was important. Of course it is and was. But being able to be myself and wade through the clouds of BS and talk to this kid, just connect with this kid. It also allowed me to trust myself and to feel like I didn't have to have all the answers. I certainly didn't. I didn't have to need to get all the answers, right? I, I my history and all the experiences that I've had, the positive ones, the negative ones, the ones that I didn't want to look at, they all work together to create my individuality, my uniqueness in the same way they do for you too. And being able, that experience allowed me to look at all of that and say, this is who I am. Let me connect. Let me allow myself to connect with the person in front of me, to dispense with this idea of what I should be as a therapist or a psychologist, right? I'm not saying it was a crazy ideal, but it was just what I thought I should be as a therapist. And I did away with that. Not to say that I did away with any professionalism, no. But I really dove in head first into trusting that I was, whoever I was, right, was good enough. And this might sound crazy, but it was really the first time that I saw the importance of that. Now, I started putting together my business, the Trauma Therapist. It was initially called the West Coast Trauma Project, and then it shifted to just the Trauma Therapist Project. I started the podcast, and my idea was to interview what I thought would be, master trauma therapists. That was it. I wanted to get on people who had experience, who could share their experience with younger clinicians like myself. And, I had been in a, I had taken level 1 and level 2 of sensory motor psychotherapy, like in my first year of graduate school. And Janina Fisher was one of the teachers. So I was so fortunate to get to meet her and then later be in a consultation group in Oakland, California with other therapists with her. So I was able to get her on the podcast early on, and that was a big, I think, incentive. But not just the only incentive. I had other, Linda Curran on initially, and it grew from there. But my point is, I wanted to bring these people on to hear about their experience. And a couple things happened. One, I learned that there are so many people, right? It's not just the well-known people out there who are doing this work. There are other people out there who are certainly less well-known and lesser well-known who are just doing as amazing work and who are also amazing people to have on the podcast. And I learned that. And I also learned that through this, a lot through this one question I was asking, which was, was asking my guests if they could share an early clinical error. And as I've said before, I was expecting to hear a lot of mistakes in interventions and techniques and slip ups, but that's not what I heard. What I began to hear over and over and over again were these oftentimes very experienced clinicians talking about how they didn't allow themselves to be vulnerable. They didn't allow themselves to connect, to share how they were feeling appropriately and ethically and within boundaries, of course, right? They missed those opportunities. They missed opportunities, as one of my guests said, to share their human beingness. To share their human beingness. And when I heard that filled me up with a lot of confidence, also shame, thinking to myself, what the hell have I been doing all this time? Why have I not just being myself? Why was I hiding those parts of me that interfered or thought interfered with allowing me to be myself and connect with this person in front of me? And when I started allowing myself to just dispense with all of the BS that I had shoved in my head, right? These ideas of how I should be, and just allowed myself to realize, to know that I didn't have to have all the answers and it didn't have to be perfect, but just to share in this moment with this kid, oftentimes, right? That shifted everything. And in turn, it shifted what I've been doing with my business, what I've been doing with my podcast, such that what I'm talking about right now is driving me. This ability for each of us to honor who we are, right? To be able to look at our own traumas, because for the longest time, even though I'd been in therapy, I didn't feel comfortable certainly talking about it on my podcast, but really looking at it and talking and sharing about it. I didn't feel comfortable, but I began to learn to do that and understand the importance for myself of looking at it and exploring it, and in turn that allowed me to be more comfortable with sharing it. This shifted so many things for me, and it really brought to my mind the importance of each of us trusting, being able to honor who we are in all of our ups and downs, right? To have the strength and courage to look at our own traumatic histories and to work on them, right? To allow the light to shine on them, the light of awareness to shine on them, and to begin that healing journey, whatever that's going to look like for each of us. And then to think about how that allows a therapist to grow, to expand, to open the doors of themselves and allow themselves to feel more comfortable, more settled, more genuine. And look, when we are talking to someone, when we meet someone who is, um, you sense it, right? You sense it when you meet someone who is just settled in themselves. They're more than content. They are at ease with themselves. They're Nothing has to move, nothing has to shift. They trust themselves. They honor themselves. When I say this, I'm talking about all facets of who they are. They don't need to be perfect. They don't need to shift what's happening right now, to change what's happening right now. They're able to be in it. When we meet that person, we our eyes widen, right? We're like, holy crap, this is amazing. They radiate, right? When we meet people who are so friggin' genuine and authentic, everything about them radiates. I mean, I have this experience a lot on my podcast when I'm talking to people. Let me take a drink of coffee here. Hold on. Excuse me. I meet so many people like this on my podcast, which is why I get the energy to keep doing it, because it so inspires me. We are so inspired by that. And for me, this would happen again and again, and I would say to myself, why? What am I doing? What am I holding back? What am I fearful of? What is weighing me down? Why can I not? Why do I need to have the answer, to shift, to change? I remember when who was it? It was one of my favorite uh, interviewees, one of my favorite guests. Sharon. Sharon. Uh, Hold on, I'm gonna have to pause this for a second and get her name. Okay, Sharon Stanley. Sharon, amazing, amazing woman. She's been on the podcast a few times, and when she said to me, "Look, it is not your job to heal someone. It's not your job to fix someone. That person oftentimes were stepped onto their healing journey years before they walked into your office. Okay? It is your job as a therapist to guide, to reflect, to be as human as you possibly can. And that really, again, like, I was like, whoa, what about wanting to help? What about wanting to heal? What about wanting to fix? And, learning as I did that the importance of really understanding why I got into this field. Now it's different. I'm not seeing clients. I'm doing this. But, why the need to shift, to fix, and that's a very delicate balance, right? You start to get into the art of being a therapist. But hearing that the work is being able to be yourself, to have your knowledge, of course, to never lose that. Hear me, I'm not saying that, right? That knowledge, of course, is crucial and vital. But to be able to be in the moment with someone requires really an incredible amount of work, of allowance, of forgiveness of ourselves, of ability to hold our traumas and to not be triggered by them when you're working with someone. As one of my other guests said to me, Joseph Bobro, amazing guy, think he's just coming out with a new book. But he said, it's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when you will be triggered when you're working with someone who's been impacted by trauma. It's going to happen. But what you can control is how the degree to which that overtakes you in that moment, right? Because if you've done your work, your inner work, right? What do I mean by that? I mean looking at your traumas, working with those traumas, carrying them, working with them along your healing journey, shining the light of awareness on them, in all the manner of ways that people heal and work with their own traumas. It's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when you will be triggered. And the degree to which you've done that work will limit the degree to which you're triggered, right? So here we are now in this place where I've been able to really more and more look at my own self, my own imperfections, and what I like to think of my strengths more compassionately. And hopefully empower other newer therapists, if you're out there, to do the same and to understand the vitality and the importance of that, especially when working with people who've been impacted by trauma. And that to me is so exciting because it means that, right, we can be ourselves, right? You don't have to be like this or that or that. You don't have to be anyone else. And that journey, each of our journey to our own authenticity is going to look differently. And that's perfectly fine. That's perfectly fine. But that to me is empowering because it means that we each have the strength and the power right here. I don't need to go read although it's great to read other books, but I don't need to read someone's book and memorize page 222 and bring that into the office with me when I was seeing clients. I could open up the doors of myself, and this doesn't just associate with in the therapeutic setting, right? This is everywhere with all of our relationships who we're relating to, families and friends and so forth. But I think what I want to say today is who you are, right? As a therapist, coach, who you are is what we need, right? We need to see that. We want to see that. I want to see that. I want to see you. This is my opinion. I don't need people to, it's not like I need you to read all these other books and and then come see me. No. I want to see you who you are, right? In all your intricacies and eccentricities and foibles and greatness in all of it. And to get there is not always easy. To get there is not always easy because we all have our little wars we're fighting within ourselves, right? I don't want to show this. I don't want to talk about my trauma because I'm a guy and it's not going to look good and I feel ashamed. I don't want to talk about how when I was younger, I don't know how the hell it happened. I didn't feel smart enough. I don't want to talk about that, right? And I'm not saying that we need to wear everything on our sleeves, but to look at all this and allow our essence to shine forth and share that with the people before us. Ooh, all right. Look, thank you so much for listening to this podcast. I love doing it, and I hope you enjoy hearing it, listening to it.